Hello and welcome. I'm Giorgio Rutelli, editor-in-chief of Formiche.net, and today with us we have Stephen Nix, who is the senior director of the International Republican Institute, the IRI, for the Eurasia region. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So Stephen is here today because with the IRA they have conducted a poll in Ukraine asking Ukrainian people a lot of questions on how they feel about the invasion and how they feel about their future, how they feel about what's happening also in the international context regarding the war. We are going to show some slides. We're going to show some numbers that you've brought us, and thank you for the work that you've done. And we will analyze some of these numbers and see how things have also changed, because you've conducted 3 different polls in the past year. One in April 2022, the other one in June 2022, and then February 2023.
Correct.
So I will start showing the first slide from the presentation, and we will comment on that and see how things have changed also in this year of conflict. So the first slide, we see how do you see the future of Ukraine, and this is quite interesting because you see that also in April 2022, when the situation was worse than today, especially on the battlefield, Ukrainians have felt that things were rather promising even after 2 months of conflict. And a year later, they still feel that the future will be positive and promising for them.
Yes, well, we assess that this is a result of 2 trends that we see in the 3 polls we've done since the war started. That's a sense of optimism and unity among Ukrainians. Optimism and unity. And this clearly states this in the first slide. People are optimistic about the future. They're also optimistic about the outcome of this war.
So the next slide is on the same, tune of the first one. And it shows that a big majority of Ukraine Ukrainians thinks that Ukraine will win the war, and the definitely yes and likely yes are basically 97% of respondents, and there's a very tiny minority that doesn't feel that they're going to make it.
Yes. Well, again, the sense of optimism about the outcome of the war, very, very clear. Again, we assess that the Ukrainians feel they have no choice. They must win this war. If they do not, their country will be erased, eliminated, destroyed. So you see this strong sense of optimism about the outcome, and you'll see it in the other questions, some of the slides that we asked about this sense of optimism and unity throughout the various questions.
So the next slide is about the territorial boundaries of Ukraine, which of course is a very hot topic because yes. There's some people that say that Ukraine should give up Crimea, or they should give up what are the so-called independent eastern regions of the country that have held those sham referendums a few months ago. The majority, if we look at the next slide, the majority of people thinks that Ukraine will maintain all territories from within its internationally recognized borders defined in 1991, so including Crimea, including the Donbas region. Yes. And then there is some, distinction between who thinks that Ukraine will regain the Donbas and Luhansk regions, but not Crimea, and who thinks that will regain territories in the border that were under control of Ukraine on February 24th of 2022 when the invasion started, yes. Meaning that probably Crimea will not be part of the settlement. But what is interesting comes in the next slide, which is the difference that has occurred between April 2022 and February 2023. So in these 2 different polls, we see that there's a much bigger share of respondents that actually thinks that Ukraine will regain Crimea also, and it goes from 53% to 74%. How do you explain this?
Sure. Well, this question was designed to ascertain, at least among Ukrainian public opinion, what's the goal? What's the desired outcome? What's the end game here? And clearly the data shows us 74% say a return to the borders of 1991, with all that that implies, as you have mentioned, the return of both Crimea and the Donbass territories. So we assess that this is reflective, the difference in the numbers from April, then June and February, is reflective of the success the Ukrainian armed forces have achieved on the battlefield. That Ukrainians recognize that there is the opportunity, in fact, a likelihood, they believe, that the Ukrainian armed forces can push the Russian armed forces out of the currently occupied territories since February, but also the territories that have been occupied since 2014. Very strong sense.
That's very interesting. And another very interesting slide is the one following, that's asking, in your opinion, which countries and international organizations provided the most support to Ukraine in the context of Russian military aggression, if any? So they're asking basically who they feel that helped them more in the international context. And we have Poland and the United States, both at 71%, Great Britain, 48%, Germany, 17%, Lithuania, 7%, European Union, then France, Estonia, and then the rest of countries that are not only European, because we also have Canada in the mix, and of course NATO in general and United Nations in general. So what I find quite interesting is a few issues. So Poland, of course, stands out. Yes. Among others, and we talked to Polish politicians with Formike, and we do know that Poland has been at the center of support to Ukraine from the beginning. They help with refugees, they help with military transfer, they help with logistics, and they also help with political push in the rest of European capitals in the support for Ukraine. United States, of course, then Great Britain, which is probably a little bit of unsung hero here in the rest of Europe, because we do not realize how strong both Boris Johnson before and now Rishi Sunak are, in how strongly they have supported Zelensky. They've invited him, they visited him, they showed a big support, even in public circumstances. What is really sad for my side is that Italy is not on this list. And on the other side, it's quite remarkable that Lithuania, being a small country and being, if you compare it to its GDP or population, it's a much bigger help that it's giving, and it's perceived by the Ukrainian people. And so it shows that it's not a question of size, it's not a question of budget, it's a question of who is really showing the most support and putting their money where the mouth is.
Yes. Well, I would address your question this way. I briefed this poll in Ukraine. As soon as we completed the poll, I traveled to Kiev. I briefed the presidential administration, the parliament, others on the data. There's a clear sense among the government authorities in Kiev of the important role that Italy has played and continues to play. So among government authorities, people in the know, there's a strong recognition of Italy's role in providing assistance to Ukraine. Again, this is a public opinion poll. This is all about public perception. What counts is the government authorities in Ukraine acknowledge and respect and appreciate all that Italy is doing militarily and also from a humanitarian and financial standpoint. So again, strong recognition. Again, we'll continue to do polls. We will see. Perhaps the next poll will reveal a different recognition of Italy's role.
Thank you. So next slide and the next one. Okay, so the following one, next. Yes, so if Ukraine was able to enter only one international economic union, which one of the following should it be? So we have a strong, preponderance of European Union in the answers. There's also customs union with Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, which is at 1%, so it's barely noticeable, very relevant. Then some other, and the numbers are quite clear. Ukrainians want to be part of the European Union. And how do you see this, wish? Because it's reflected also in another slide that we're going to see in a little bit.
Yes. Well, the EU numbers, something we've been testing for years in Ukraine. Every poll that IRI conducts in Ukraine shows a trend upward, that more and more Ukrainians recognize the value and the importance of being a member of the European Union. So that number continues to trend upward, is very, very strong. And as you point out, the NATO numbers also got a great deal of attention while I was in Kiev, and happy to answer your questions about NATO.
So we show the next slide, and here we see if a referendum was held today on Ukraine joining NATO, how would you vote? And we see a stark difference between what happened in April 2022 and February 2023. The numbers go from 59% to 82.9%. So the majority, the wide majority, because then we also have some parts that doesn't know how to respond or would not maybe vote. Mm-hmm. So the people who are strikingly against this move are just 3%. So the NATO perception has changed in the past year.
Yes. The important aspect of this question, again, we've been testing this for some time, is this dramatic increase from the outset of the war, 23% increase in the number of Ukrainians who want their country to be part of NATO. A really, really change. This is the biggest change we see in any of the questions we've asked in these three polls. How do we assess this? The most important thing for your viewers to understand is the change that you see from the first poll to the most recent poll, the 23%, is coming primarily, almost exclusively, from the East and from the South. Heretofore, we had always had strong 90% support in Western Ukraine. But testing geographically, we divide Ukraine into 4 different geographic regions. There was always a difference between the East and the West. Now we are seeing in our polling, as I alluded in my opening statement, not only a sense of optimism, but a sense of unity, that these geographic differences that we previously saw in polls that existed are going away. Ukraine is becoming united. There are very little differences geographically when it comes to this NATO question. So it's a sense of unity. We could make the argument that the war that Russia has launched is unifying Ukrainians on so many different topics.
So next 2 slides are quite interesting because they show the support of Ukrainian people of the activities of the president, Volodymyr Zelensky. And we see some difference here, but maybe you can explain better what kind of difference we're seeing. In April 2022, the support for President Zelensky was at 74%, and we are talking about the strongly approve camp, because then there is somewhat approve, that is 20%. And then a year later, you see that in general, the positive side towards Zelensky is almost the same. There's a very small change in percentage, but it's a less strong commitment, it's a less strong feeling towards the president.
Yes. Well, the response is very easy. When we measure these polls, when we measure job approval ratings, first of all, I'll start by President Zelensky has a 91% job approval rating, which is phenomenal. We've done polling in the former Soviet space for 20 years. We've never seen any leader have numbers even close to this, a 91% job approval rating. Any leader would give his right arm to have such ratings. Okay. So clearly the Ukrainian people have rallied around this wartime president. The differences that you allude to is it's about intensity. From a statistical standpoint, we always combine the strongly approve and somewhat approve into one number. So we can say statistically President Zelensky remains popular at 91%. The intensity has changed somewhat, but again, overall, very strong support from the Ukrainian people, and we expect that to continue.
Next numbers are about reconstruction and restoration. You've asked the Ukrainian people who should finance this restoration.
Yes.
And the first answer is that things should be paid with Russian seized assets or Russian payments for damages. Then international organization, Ukrainian central government, Ukrainian businesses. This also, is quite interesting because there's the following slide that we're going to see is that who should primarily control the use of funds for the restoration of Ukraine's damaged infrastructure. And now we see the numbers. And on the first, on the top spot, we find international organizations. So, of course, we understand why Ukrainians would want Russian to pay. Of course, there's a lot of discussions also about, punishment for what has been done. And unfortunately, there's not yet a path towards that because international tribunals, international justice are, struggling to find a way to get Russia to justice. But at the same time, it's very interesting that the Ukrainian people give more trust to international organization than their own citizens or their own central government. So again, we're going back to the European Union question. I think that if you talk to European people, to Ukrainian people, they are ready and willing and hoping to have European Union as a path forward.
Yes, well, again, these are very important questions because as Ukraine continues to have success on the battlefield, the authorities in Kiev, but also EU, NATO, other organizations are already starting to think in terms of the reconstruction of Ukraine. So this is important data for all of us to have and to utilize. So clearly, the Ukrainian people expect Russia to pay for the damages that Russia has caused. Again, it won't be an easy path. In the United States, there is something like $30 billion in frozen funds from the Russian central bank. Your country, Germany, UK, other European countries have even higher numbers. The challenge for us is to go from frozen assets, which is a fairly easy procedure to follow, to freeze foreign assets. But the next step is to confiscate assets that are frozen and to use them for another purpose, in this case, rebuilding Ukraine. That's the challenge in the United States. Currently, the statute that governs frozen assets doesn't completely empower the President of the United States to take that next step and to utilize those funds for another purpose. There is legislation being discussed and drafted that would empower the President to take such a step. We're hopeful that that takes place because we feel that that would provide an avenue, an argument for our European colleagues to follow a similar path legislatively to take these frozen assets and utilize them for the benefit of Ukraine.
So the next polling is on the plans in case of the aggravation of the situation on the front. Have you moved from your home as a result of the war? And we see a big majority has not moved. A small percentage has moved, but then came back to their homes. And then there is a percentage that has definitely moved and probably might not go back to where they lived because either it's been destroyed, either it's dangerous, etc. And then if we go to the next slide, we see that what do you plan to do in the event of aggravation of the situation at the front? For example, a repeated attack on the liberated territories. And now here we see again the resilience, the strength, the determination of the Ukrainian people, because a big majority says that either they will stay where they live now or they join the armed forces. And so we're talking about a 75 commitment of percent of people that are committed to the cause of Ukraine and are not willing to give up their homes, their territories, and their livelihoods. So how do you see this resolve from the Ukrainian people.
Sure. Well, you're absolutely correct. This slide demonstrates the determination of the Ukrainian people, again, in the face of this massive onslaught from the Russian armed forces, the determination, again, to stay and to fight and to survive. I can tell you from being in Kiev, my first full night there, I spent in an air raid shelter. That was the night that Russia launched some 95 missiles nationwide against Ukraine. The next day, we went to our meetings. The citizens of Kiev went to work, and life returned to normal. And it was a wonderful demonstration of the way that Ukrainians are dealing with this conflict. That is to go on with your life, to show Russia that they're not going to be cowed by these missile strikes against civilian targets, and they're going to go on and continue their lives as normal. It's an extraordinary exhibit of will, determination, and bravery.
Thank you. So I think that is a very good note to end our interview today. Thank you to Stephen Nix of the International Republican Institute, and thank you to our viewers of Formiche and to Urania News and Digital Company that is hosting us today. Thank you and see you soon.